The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was signed into law last February to improve the country's overall economy by achieving different goals.
The goals of this package aren't simply just to create jobs, but the goals of this package are to create energy savings, to improve schools, to improve the infrastructure. So we need to look at these goals holistically. We need to look at this as an entire package. Right now, there's been a lot of positive steps taken, but there's a lot of work left to be done.
A question that comes up when discussing the recovery plan is how to ensure the money is well distributed. Chris Keeley believes there should be a set of standards to make sure that the money stays within the community.
So if there's a project in the South Bronx, you would need to have hiring. A certain proportion of the jobs be given to those people that live in the South Bronx. If there's a public housing project, then a certain percentage of the jobs would go to those individuals living in the public housing project. There are standards like that that could be put in place at the state level or at the city level, because the real goal here is for economic recovery. The real goal here is for economic reinvestment in our communities.
He also believes in order for the recovery plan to work effectively, there should be a broader transparency as to where the money is coming from and to where it's being used.
Right now, what we need is a system put in place so that we can follow money all the way from the U.S. Treasury, where the checks are cut, all the way down to the pothole that it fills on the street corner in your neighborhood. We need to have that level of transparency so that we can follow those dollars all the way from the federal level straight on down, so that we know how much it costs to fill the pothole in the corner, how many jobs it created, because that's how we're going to know what's effective.
It's difficult to establish the results of the recovery plan in the early stages to find out what impact these investments will have. But is it working? Is it gonna work?
Right now, the effectiveness of the stimulus package is very difficult to determine. It's very early in the process. A lot of the money hasn't even been identified as far as where it will be invested. A lot of the money hasn't even been spent yet. And so it's very difficult to determine its success. Right now, it looks like it is providing an opportunity to help remake our economy, to help our economy recover in the long term. But it's yet to be seen.
Well, let's begin by taking a quick run of the table. Simply, have they done the right things so far? And is there any sign that it's working? Andrew, let's start with you.
It's certainly too early to figure out if it's working. I mean, the money, in most cases, as we've seen, has not even been distributed yet. We've certainly seen the president come out and say, point to specific instances where people have basically acknowledge that they're going to be hiring again, certainly for large construction projects that we know. There's sort of a twofold purpose to the recovery plan. One is not only to sort of get the economy back on its feet, but also to really set the stage for future growth. And if you take those things together, sometimes some of these projects that have been picked are not able to do both. So a lot of the highway projects that are sort of quick out the door that create jobs are not necessarily where we want to be in terms of what the urban infrastructure is going to look like, but those were the types of projects that were ready to go. So I think there's going to need to be a delicate balancing act from that perspective. But to the extent that a lot of the money is going into construction, from the perspective of the Latino community, that's an area where there's typically been a lot of employment. And so I think that it bodes well, but it's still very early on, and it's hard to tell whether the money is being well spent.
Josh Bivens?
I think the Recovery Act was a great piece of legislation. I don't think we've seen a lot of the impact of it yet, although I will say a couple things. I mean, one, we've got a lot of people who would have exhausted their unemployment benefits if the act wasn't passed and they weren't extended, so it mattered a lot to them. If you look at the first quarter GDP report, tax collections were down by about $11 billion because of the Making Work Pay tax credit, which is exactly the point, give people more disposable income so they can spend. So the very front edge of all that spending has sort of seeped into the economy. We're not going to see a big macro effect like many more jobs created, I don't think, until later this year. But they will be very welcome because this economy continues to deteriorate. We lost over 600,000 private sector jobs last month. So it's not like we won't welcome that big macro impact when it comes later this year.
And almost all of an unemployment check gets spent, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, this is by definition, these are people who are cash strapped and need money just to make the day-to-day expenses. And that is the definition of good economic stimulus, money that will be spent right away.
Royal Campos?
Well, I think the act, the Recovery Act, is very important, fundamentally psychologically, because the public needs to feel that the federal government is on its case dealing with the problem. And as we all know, psychology is a huge component of any economy. But we have several things that we haven't seen before quite in the same way, in the same mix. First of all, if the economy recovers, and some of the best guesses are next year, the unemployment relief won't come till a lag period, maybe 17 months later. So we're not going to have, you know, the market, for example, going up, statistics going up, and also unemployment, you know, going down. It'll lag. Secondly, we have a situation in which Americans are starting to save again, you know, and the savings rate has gone, you know, amazingly from 0.5% to over 3% in almost a quarter.
Wait, you're saying that like it's a problem.
Well,
explain to me what the problem is.
You know, economists and others who look at the long term have wanted savings rate in the U.S. to grow. That provides investment capital and so forth. But in the middle of a recession, or even one that borders on a depression, savings ends up being a problem because you don't have money circulating through the economy. You have less lending. The other problem is credit cards, for example, and consumer spending is decreasing substantially because credit card companies are reducing credit lines. So you have less money for people to spend. And so you have all of these things playing into the economy that'll make it much more difficult. And finally, any recovery is more difficult on minority communities. Minority communities like Latinos, you know, are involved in working blue-collar jobs. Those are the first ones to go. Those are the first people who let go. They're the last ones to be brought on board.
And Nicola Moore.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I would disagree with some of the things that were said at this table. I don't really believe that this was, in fact, a very good bill. And I think part of that, as was pointed out in the film and as was mentioned at the table, is due to the fact that this money isn't being spent right away. It's therefore not a stimulus bill. It's spending under another name. It was cast off as being stimulus in the name of getting other priorities through, which, whether or not those priorities are good or bad, is a separate issue, but it doesn't make them stimulative. And while I would agree that, you know, the psychological effects of the bill are in fact important, all of that comes with a price, and the price of this bill is very important to remember. With interest, it's going to be $1.2 trillion, which works out to about $9,400 in new debt per person. So I'm very nervous about the prospects of this bill for all of those reasons.